There's an entire generation of people who remember both rotary phones and the first iPhone launch, and psychologists can't quite figure out where to put them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you're on the tail end of Gen X, but you're hardly a millennial, even though everyone keeps trying to shove you into one of those boxes. Most people know this group as Xennials, the Gen X millennial cusp, and some creators use the label Xennials for this specific 1976 to 1985 slice. And some sociologists have even labeled this group a microgeneration because the window is so specific. What happened during that specific slice of history created something that's genuinely worth examining. So today we're going to explore what makes them interesting from a psychological perspective.
From the very beginning, your childhood unfolded in an analog world where boredom wasn't treated like an emergency. It was just a normal state you learned to tolerate. You waited, you daydreamed, you stared out a car window and let your mind wander. You also carried information in your head. Phone numbers, directions, schedules, the unspoken rules of when to show up and where to meet. And there was a particular kind of consequence that came with that era. If you missed your favorite TV show, it didn't get clipped and served back to you instantly. It was just gone. You had to live with the gap, and that gap quietly trained patience, memory, and a different relationship with time. Then something happened that most people don't fully appreciate unless they lived through it at the right age. Just as you were moving into adulthood, the entire cultural operating system changed. Not slowly, not in gentle stages. Suddenly, the world flipped from analog default to digital default. And the timing of that flip matters. Most generations are shaped inside one dominant technology paradigm. They either grow up fully inside the before or fully inside the after. Xennials didn't. Xennials straddled both, and they straddled them during the exact years when identity, independence, social belonging, and life direction are still being built. Think about what that means in practical, everyday terms. A big chunk of your teen life ran on systems that were physically grounded and socially high trust. You passed real notes in class. You had conversations that vanished the second they ended. You made plans that couldn't be constantly updated. If you were late, you couldn't send a quick 2 mins text. If your friend wasn't there, you stood around wondering if you got the time wrong, if they forgot, if something happened, or if you were simply going to miss each other. That required a kind of commitment that's rare today. You showed up and waited because that's what you did. Social life wasn't always on. It was scheduled, local, and sometimes uncertain. And you developed a tolerance for that uncertainty.
And then in your 20s, you watched the rules change in real time. Cell phones went from luxury to standard. The internet stopped being a place you visited and started becoming a place you lived. Social platforms arrived in waves. Friendster, then MySpace, then Facebook, each one reshaping how people presented themselves and how they stayed connected. Before social media, contacting someone was simple and limited. Home phone, work phone, or physically showing up. That limitation created boundaries by default. Then, suddenly there were endless channels. Texts, DMs, emails, group chats, apps that multiplied faster than anyone could count. And what's striking is that you didn't just witness it, you adapted to it. You learned the new language while still remembering the old one. This matters psychologically because of when it happened in your development. Research on brain maturation shows that the prefrontal cortex, the region involved in planning, self-regulation, flexible thinking, and learning complex new skills, continues developing into the mid to late 20s. A study published in Nature Neuroscience found this maturation extends well into the 20s. So Xennials weren't adapting to a new technological world after their cognitive patterns were fully set. Many of you were still inside a high plasticity window when the environment was rewritten. That's a rare combination, young enough that new tech felt learnable and normal, but old enough to clearly remember life before it. Compare that with the generations on either side. Gen X often encountered the digital shift as adults with established habits, which can create a more skeptical or cautious relationship with technology, less automatic trust, more questions about whether it's improving life or just complicating it. Millennials, especially younger ones, often have little to no emotional memory of a world without the internet. For them, constant connectivity isn't a new layer, it's the baseline. Xennials have both, and that both creates a kind of psychological bilingualism that's surprisingly powerful. You can do fully offline presence without feeling like you're missing oxygen. You can hold eye contact and stay in a conversation without reflexively checking your phone every 30 seconds. But you're also not intimidated by change. New software doesn't feel like an existential threat. You can pick up a tool, learn the interface, figure it out, and move on.
You also remember something that's becoming rarer, being genuinely unreachable. Not "I ignored you," but truly unavailable. Hours could pass where no one could contact you, and that wasn't seen as suspicious or rude. It was normal. That experience shapes your nervous system and your expectations of other people. It teaches that silence doesn't automatically mean rejection, danger, or conflict. At the same time, you're fluent in modern communication norms. You can navigate group chats, apps, quick replies, constant updates, and the unspoken etiquette of the online world. You carry both sets of instincts, and you switch between them without thinking. This dual upbringing shows up in places people don't always notice, like privacy. You grew up in a world where embarrassing moments usually dissolved over time instead of being permanently searchable. That awkward haircut, that middle school crush, that breakup he'd rather forget, that drunk night at a party. For many Xennials, there isn't a high-resolution archive of those moments living online forever. They survive as stories, not evidence, and that changes your relationship with the past in a deep way. When your history isn't constantly documented, your memories have room to evolve the way human memory naturally does. They soften at the edges. They become narratives. They get reinterpreted through new maturity and new context. Research on autobiographical memory suggests that recall is fluid. Our minds don't store experiences like perfect video files. We revise them. We keep what matters. We blur what doesn't. That's not a flaw. It's how humans maintain coherence and meaning. But when everything is recorded, time-stamped, and retrievable, that natural process gets interrupted. The past doesn't fade in the same way. It follows you. It can be resurfaced at any time by anyone, and it can freeze a version of you that no longer exists. Xennials are positioned right on the boundary of that shift, which means you experienced both the freedom of fading and the weight of permanent documentation.
And then there's the second major force that hit at exactly the wrong moment: economics. Many Xennials entered the adult job market around the 2008 financial crisis, which means a huge number of you ran straight into instability during the years when you were supposed to be laying down your foundation: career identity, savings, confidence, long-term planning. That timing isn't just bad luck. It can leave lasting psychological fingerprints. Research on economic hardship suggests that financial shocks during early adulthood can shape risk perception, security needs, and long-term decision-making. People who experience job loss, underemployment, or prolonged instability during that stage often carry the emotional lessons forward even after things improve, not because they're pessimistic, but because the body remembers what it felt like when stability wasn't guaranteed. So you end up with a highly specific combination: a group trained by necessity to adapt to massive technological change, and also shaped by financial uncertainty at the exact moment stability was supposed to begin. You can navigate change because you had to. You learned flexibility not as a lifestyle trend, but as survival. But you may also carry an undercurrent of caution, the quiet sense that things can collapse without warning, that normal isn't permanent, that security is something you build and rebuild, rather than something you ever fully rely on. And what's strange is how rarely this combination is discussed. The cultural conversation tends to lump people into huge categories: Gen X versus Millennials, as if everyone born between the mid-60s and the late 90s shared the same developmental world. But the exact years you were born, especially during periods of rapid change, can create experiences that are sharply distinct. Xennials often live inside a paradox that's genuinely unusual. You have the self-reliance and mild skepticism associated with Gen X because you grew up before hyper-tracking parenting became the norm. Your parents didn't always know where you were, and it wasn't a crisis. You learned to troubleshoot your own problems, to entertain yourself, to manage boredom and frustration without immediate adult intervention. That kind of upbringing tends to produce independence and competence.
But you also came of age during the optimistic early internet era, when technology was framed as a tool that would connect everyone, democratize knowledge, and make life smoother. You lived through that hope before the cultural mood shifted, and we collectively realized
realized that the same technology can amplify anxiety, comparison, distraction, and conflict. So you carry both dispositions at once, independent but socially adaptable, skeptical but capable of optimism, analog-rooted yet digitally fluent. It's a strange place to stand, but it also creates a defining strength, the ability to hold contradictions without feeling like you need to pick a side. Because you remember before and after, you can see what was gained and what was lost. You may not be nostalgic in the exact way Gen X can be, because you genuinely appreciate the convenience and possibility of the modern world. But unlike many younger people, you still recognize the trade-offs with a kind of clarity. You lost the effortless solitude of being alone with your thoughts. You lost the patience trained by waiting. You lost a certain kind of presence that existed when attention wasn't constantly being competed for. Yet you gained connection, access to information, and opportunities your younger self couldn't have imagined. And that's why so many Xennials report the same emotional sensation, not quite fitting anywhere, too young for some cultural references, too old for others, caught between two worlds. But that's not a defect in the identity, it's the identity. It's the defining feature of this micro-generations experience. In a world that keeps changing faster than anyone can predict, having already lived through one massive transition may be one of the most valuable forms of preparation. You've learned firsthand that the environment you were raised in doesn't have to be the one you live in forever, and that the real challenge isn't adapting, it's adapting without losing yourself in the process. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing, and if you want to help me keep making content like this, consider becoming a channel member. Your support genuinely means a lot. I've got some other videos queued up that I think you'll connect with, different topics but the same kind of depth. I'll see you in the next one.